The legend of the Forbidden Forest. Deep in the heart of an unnamed mountainous region in Asia lies a dense and foreboding forest, cloaked in an eternal fog and known only as the Forest of Shadows. The locals speak of it in hushed whispers, warning of the curses that linger beneath its canopy. At the heart of this dark expanse lies a fabled treasure, a hoard of gold, gemstones, and ancient artifacts rumored to have been hidden by a long-lost kingdom. The lure of untold riches has drawn countless adventurers and fortune-seekers into the forest, yet few have returned. Those who do are found changed, their bodies mutilated or their minds shattered, unable to speak of what they witnessed. Legends speak of two threats that guard the treasure. One is a tribe of cold-blooded cannibals, said to have forsaken humanity to worship dark forest spirits. The other is a breed of mysterious creatures, neither human nor beast, who stalk the woods with glowing eyes and sharp claws. Both are said to ensure that no outsider disturbs their sacred ground. The mountains stood like silent sentinels against the horizon, their peaks veiled by swirling mist. Their sheer faces glistened with a damp sheen, as though perpetually kissed by the clouds. In their shadow lay the Forest of Shadows, a place whispered about in fear across the region. The forest was a vast, dark expanse where the sunlight barely penetrated the dense canopy, leaving the undergrowth shrouded in an eternal twilight. The air here seemed heavy, almost alive, pressing down on those who dared to approach. David Morgan stood at the edge of the village, staring at the shadowy outline of the forest. He was a tall man in his late 30s, with sharp features and a weathered look that spoke of years spent chasing the unattainable. His rugged frame and piercing blue eyes contrasted with the softness of the villagers who bustled around him, keeping their distance. David was an adventurer by trade and reputation, a man who thrived on danger and the promise of reward. But even he couldn't shake the unease creeping up his spine as he gazed at the forest. Behind him, Sarah, a petite woman with sharp green eyes and auburn hair tied into a practical braid, adjusted her camera strap. She was here for the story, a photographer chasing the perfect shot that would catapult her career into stardom. Her casual clothes hid a steely determination. Sarah wasn't the type to scare easily, but the villagers' wary glances and whispered warnings had left her unsettled. "You think it's all true?" she asked, breaking the silence. Her voice wavered slightly as she glanced at David, hoping for reassurance. "Legends grow with time," he replied, forcing a grin. "But there's always a kernel of truth. Let's just focus on the treasure, not the bedtime stories." Beside them stood Vikram Patel, a historian whose curiosity had drawn him into this dangerous venture. His round glasses perched precariously on his nose as he studied a map spread across his hands. He was the oldest of the group, with a calm demeanor and a penchant for overthinking. "These symbols," he muttered, pointing to crude markings on the map. "They match carvings found in the Indus Valley, symbols of protection and warning. If the locals believe this forest is cursed, they must have a reason." Chen, their guide, stood a few feet away, his face grim. He was a wiry man in his 40s, with skin tanned from years in the sun and eyes that darted nervously between the forest and the group. He had lived in the village his whole life, and every instinct told him to stay far away from the forest. But money spoke louder than fear, and the group's generous payment had convinced him to lead them, reluctantly. "You shouldn't have come here," Chen said, his voice low. "The forest doesn't forgive. If you turn back now, it will spare you. If you go in—" His words trailed off, replaced by the mournful cries of crows circling overhead. The forest loomed ahead like a gaping maw. Its trees were unnaturally tall, their twisted trunks covered in moss and vines. The group hesitated at the edge, the transition from sunlight to shadow stark and jarring. The air felt cooler, heavier, as though the forest itself was alive and aware of their presence. David took the first step, his boots crunching on the leaf-strewn ground. The others followed reluctantly, their every movement echoing in the oppressive silence. Even the wind seemed to die here, leaving only the faint rustle of leaves and the occasional distant cry of an unseen animal. Sarah's camera clicked repeatedly as she documented the haunting beauty of the forest. Her unease was tempered by the thrill of capturing something unique. She paused to photograph a massive tree, its gnarled roots snaking across the ground like petrified serpents. "This place is incredible," she said, her voice hushed. "It feels ancient." "It is," Vikram replied, his eyes scanning the forest with equal parts awe and caution. "These trees could be thousands of years old. This land has seen empires rise and fall. Whatever's hidden here, it's older than any of us can imagine." Chen walked at the rear, muttering prayers under his breath. His hand gripped the handle of his machete tightly, his knuckles white. He felt eyes on them, unseen but unmistakable. "We shouldn't linger," he urged. "The forest doesn't like intruders." As the group ventured deeper, strange markings began to appear on the trees, symbols carved with precision and purpose. Some resembled human figures with elongated limbs, while others depicted what looked like creatures with glowing eyes. Sarah stopped to photograph them, but Chen pulled her away. "Leave them," he warned. "They're not for us." The ground grew softer, the air damper. The smell of decay was faint but persistent, a reminder of the cycle of life and death that governed this place. David found himself gripping his machete more tightly, the weight of the forest pressing down on him. He glanced back at the group, noting their unease. Even Vikram, who had been so eager to decode the forest's secrets, looked pale. It was Chen who broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "The tribe," he said, his eyes scanning the shadows. "They live deep in the forest. They worship something old. They don't like outsiders." David stopped in his tracks, turning to face Chen. "And what about the creatures?" he asked, his voice steady, but his heart racing. "The glowing eyes, the claws?" Chen hesitated, his face a mask of fear. "They're not of this world," he said finally. "They belong to the forest. They serve it." Night fell quickly in the forest of shadows, the darkness enveloping the group like a living entity. They set up camp in a small clearing, their fire casting flickering shadows on the surrounding trees. The air was thick with tension, each crackle of the firewood echoing unnaturally loud. Sarah sat close to the fire, clutching her camera as if it were a talisman. "Do you think they're watching us?" she asked, her voice barely audible. David nodded grimly. "If the stories are true, they've been watching since we entered." Vikram busied himself with his notes, his hands trembling slightly as he sketched the symbols they had encountered. "Knowledge is power," he murmured, as much to himself as to the group. "If we understand their language, maybe we can avoid conflict." Chen sat apart from the others, his machete resting across his lap. His eyes darted to the shadows beyond the firelight, his body tense and ready to spring into action. "You don't avoid conflict here," he said darkly. "You survive it." The night was long and restless. Strange sounds echoed through the forest. Low growls, distant footsteps, and the occasional snapping of branches. The group huddled close to the fire, their weapons within reach, their thoughts heavy with the realization that they were not alone. As dawn broke, the forest seemed to sigh, its oppressive weight lifting slightly, but the group knew the worst was yet to come. The forest of shadows had let them in, but it would not let them leave without a price. Their second day in the forest began with an uneasy stillness. Each member of the group felt it, a palpable tension hanging in the air. The forest seemed alive, its presence pressing down on them, whispering warnings with every rustle of the leaves and creak of the branches. The final hours. The group set up camp at the edge of the clearing, too exhausted to press on. As night fell, the forest's atmosphere grew even more oppressive. The firelight flickered weakly, casting long shadows on the surrounding trees. Sarah sat close to the fire, her arms wrapped around her knees as she stared into the flames. Her thoughts raced, replaying every warning they'd received. The eerie carvings, the strange sounds at night, the bone-strewn clearing. It all painted a picture she didn't want to admit. She glanced at David, who was sharpening his machete with a focused intensity that bordered on obsession. "Do you ever stop to think what you're risking?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Is any treasure worth this?" David didn't look up. "You came here for a story, didn't you? To make a name for yourself? This treasure could change our lives." "Not if it gets us killed," Sarah shot back, her voice rising. You saw those bones. Whatever's out there doesn't care about our lives. Enough, Chen interrupted, his voice sharp. He stood at the edge of the camp, his machete gripped tightly. They're watching us. Arguing will only draw them closer. Sarah fell silent, her fear momentarily overshadowed by the chilling certainty in Chen's voice. The forest seemed to pulse around them, alive with an unseen energy. Even the flames of their fire wavered as if affected by an invisible force. As the night deepened, an otherworldly cry pierced the air. It was neither human nor animal, an echoing wail that froze the blood in their veins. The shadows around the camp seemed to move, closing in with every second. Then, from the darkness, glowing eyes began to emerge. "Stand ready," David barked, his voice shaking but determined. The group huddled together, weapons drawn, as the first of the creatures stepped into the firelight. Its skeletal frame seemed to shimmer, its pale, leathery skin stretched taut over elongated limbs. The glowing eyes locked onto them with an intelligence that was both chilling and alien. David swung his machete as the creature lunged, the blade slicing through the air with a sickening sound. The creature let out a guttural shriek, but did not falter. It was joined by others, the firelight reflecting off their hollow, glowing eyes. Chen fought fiercely, his machete connecting with one of the creatures, but for every one they struck down, more seemed to emerge from the darkness. "Run!" Chen screamed, his voice raw with desperation. "We can't fight them all!" David hesitated, his survival instincts warring with his determination to stand his ground. Sarah grabbed his arm, her voice trembling. "David, please, we have to go!" With a reluctant nod, David turned and followed Sarah as she sprinted into the forest. Chen brought up the rear, his weapons swinging wildly to fend off their pursuers. The forest closed in around them, the oppressive darkness making every step a gamble. The cries of the creatures grew fainter, but the sense of being hunted remained. Finally, they stumbled into a ravine, the steep walls offering a brief reprieve from their pursuers. The group collapsed, gasping for breath, their bodies trembling from exertion and terror. Sarah clutched her camera tightly, as though it could offer some form of protection. David stared into the darkness, his grip on his machete unwavering. "This forest won't let us leave," Chen said, his voice heavy with resignation. "We have to find another way. The path we came from is closed." "Then we push forward," David said, his voice firm despite the fear in his eyes. "If we stop, we're dead." With no other options, the group pressed on, their path illuminated only by the faint light of the moon. The forest seemed to shift around them, its ancient trees twisting and groaning as if alive. Hours passed in a blur of fear and exhaustion, until they finally stumbled upon a glimmering cave. Inside, the air was still and cold, the walls lined with veins of glittering gold and gemstones. "The treasure," David breathed, his eyes wide with disbelief. For a moment, the horrors they had faced seemed to fade, replaced by the allure of unimaginable wealth. But the moment of awe was short-lived. From the shadows of the cave, the tribe emerged. Their painted faces glinted in the dim light, their eyes filled with malice. They moved with a terrifying precision, their weapons raised. "It's a trap," Chen whispered, his voice laced with despair. Before they could react, the tribe descended upon them. Sarah screamed as she was dragged away, her camera slipping from her grasp. Chen fought valiantly, his machete flashing in the dim light, but he was quickly overwhelmed. David stood frozen, his mind racing for a way out. Then, as if guided by some unseen force, David spotted an opening in the cave wall. He lunged toward it, his breath catching as he saw a faint glimmer of moonlight beyond. He scrambled through the narrow passage, his body scraping against the jagged rocks. Behind him, the cries of his companions echoed, but he didn't look back. The passage opened onto a cliffside overlooking the forest. David stumbled to the edge, his chest heaving as he stared out at the endless sea of trees. For a moment, he considered jumping, the thought of escape more appealing than the horrors that awaited him if he stayed. But then he heard it. The faint cry of Sarah, calling his name. Against every instinct, he turned back, his heart pounding as he plunged once more into the darkness. The forest of shadows did not let its prey go easily. And as the first light of dawn touched its ancient trees, the forest swallowed its secrets once more. The treasure remained untouched, a deadly lure for the next unfortunate souls who dared to enter. And for those who did escape its grasp, the shadows would linger in their minds forever, a haunting reminder of the price of greed.
Beneath the peaks where the clouds kiss stone lies a forest of shadows where no soul roams alone. Legends tell of treasures deep, golden gems untamed, but the whispers warn of curses and guardians unnamed. Run from the eyes that glow in the night, run from the cries that steal your light. The forest of shadows, it watches, it waits for the foolish and bold to seal their fate. The trees lean close, their branches creak, markings carved of warnings bleak. A tribe that dances to a spirit's hymn, and creatures that stalk where the light grows dim. The fire flickers, the darkness swells, every breath echoes ancient spells. A cave of gold, a deadly snare, riches gleam but none escape its lair. Run from the eyes that glow in the night, run from the cries that steal your light. The forest of shadows, it watches, it waits for the foolish and bold to seal their fate. A scream in the dark, a path unknown. The forest claims those who walk alone through jagged cliffs and haunting cries. The treasure calls, but the soul it denies. Forever it lingers, the haunting tune, under the watch of the ghostly moon. The forest of shadows, a tale to be told of lives undone by greed and gold. Run from the eyes that glow in the night, run from the cries that steal your light. The forest of shadows, it watches, it waits for the foolish and bold to seal their fate.